Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here. Today we're going to be adventurers and we're going to be entering into the Lost Tomb. Now together we're going to be working cooperatively in this thematic, story-driven, scenario-based cooperative game for 1 to 6 players. And once we're in that tomb, we're going to be wandering around and exploring around different rooms. We're going to see all sorts of different interesting things. We're going to be grabbing different weapons and items. We're going to see creatures, and lots of them. And then we're going to be fighting them together to try to fulfill whatever that specific scenario has for us. Now today, what we're going to do is show you how to play the game. We're going to dive into the rules and in detail show you how it's played so you can just crack the game open, punch out the components, watch this video, refer to it, and dive right into playing quickly. So without further ado, let's take a look at how it's played. At the beginning of the setup, you're going to put these 3 basic tiles in the middle: the tomb's entrance, Quetzalcoatl's Hall, and Quetzalcoatl's Descent. Now off to the side, not connected to anything, you're going to put Pharaoh's Hall and Mongol's Hall. Those are different levels that you'll be able to get to later on. Then we set up all the cards here. First we have the tomb cards. Now these cards are made up of green cards and red cards. If you want it to be very easier, you put just green cards in that deck. If you want it to be super hard, you put just red. If you want medium, you put red and green and shuffle them together. We also have the story cards here. We have the base monster cards here. We have item cards. We have Soul Monger. We have the status effects. We have the elite monsters. We have the artifacts. And we have the companion cards. All of these get shuffled except the Soul Monger and the status effect cards. We also stack all the other room tiles and put them in a big draw pile. You then give this Comet Track to whoever the expedition leader is going to be guiding you through the entire expedition. Now starting with that expedition leader and going clockwise, everyone's going to select one of the adventurers. This isn't even all of them, but they select which adventurer they want. And once you've selected your adventurer, in this case I have Christopher St. George, I get the standee that I put in a plastic base. You get a search token with the green face up. In this case it says I have the Tommy gun and the fedora. So from the item deck, which looks like that, we draw the Tommy gun and the fedora for here. And here are some starting stats. This is Audacity points, and this is health, and this is courage. Now knowing these, those are my starting stats. Essentially what I'll do is I will put this just like this. And here 4 was the Audacity, 15 was my starting health, which is right here. And -1 for courage, and I put that right here because that says courage. In addition, this table shows you what else you get. Now, depending on how many adventurers you have, you may add extra Audacity points, action tokens, or companions, and that's from the companion deck here. If you're playing with less than 3 players, 1 or 2, you can both choose to play with extra adventurers each. You could each play with 2 adventurers, or you can get all the extra stuff for 1 and 2. In this case, in a 4-player game, I'll get 1 extra Audacity point, and we'll get 3 action tokens. So I would get 3 of these action tokens, which are bullets, and I would get 1 additional Audacity point, which is 5. Now also, some adventurers have special abilities. If it says infinite, you do nothing. If it has a spot to put a special ability token, you do that as well. You then place all the adventures in the game in the tomb's entrance. You'll also set up all the other components in different piles. For example, you have ropes and items and attribute bonuses and traps and elder signs and quest bonuses and damage tokens and soul shards, swarms for monsters, and dice. Now you'll also select a scenario to play in this game, and they have special rules, special setups, and you'll go through this core scenario book. And there's many of them in this book, but the Pharaoh with the Blue Eyes is the first one that you should probably start with. It has special things on how to set things up. You'll use certain artifacts, you'll use certain creatures, it'll tell you how long it will take. It'll also give you win and loss conditions, along with how different things get triggered in the story with different scenario effects that happen on cards. This game's played in 2 phases, the adventure phase and the tomb phase. During the adventure phase, each player, starting with the person who has the comet, will start and they'll go clockwise. Everybody will do 1 action, and this will continue clockwise until everybody's actions are gone. When you spend an action, you simply just flip this over to the red reload side. Once everybody's bullets are all set to reload, we then move to the tomb phase. So let's talk about what you can do with these different actions. The first thing you can do is move. So this is me here. I want to spend 1 action to move. Now I can move up to a number of tiles equal to my movement attribute, so it's 4. So here's 1. Now, anywhere you see a spot that has these green 3 comet stripes, you can explore a new room. So let's say we want to explore a new room here. I would go to the stack of tiles, and they say level 1, 2, or 3. There's no level 1 here, and you start on level 1. So I would discard this to a discard pile. This one can be used on level 1, 2, or 3. Since level 1's there, I can use this tile. Now you'll notice before I show you this tile that we're about to explore that in the start tiles, all of these openings have a 3-starred comet, which means this is available to go explore a new room to. And so when I take out the new tile, you'll notice a few things, is that this tile itself only has 1 of these. What that means is that when you take this tile out, it has to go in this direction because this has to match here. Now some tiles that you pull may have that on all directions, and in that case it doesn't matter which orientation you use the tile, but any new room always has to have this, and what this means for this room is that I cannot, once I'm in here, I cannot explore this any further because there's no other places that I can. Now it took me 1 movement to move here and another movement to move into Explorer's tile. Even though I have movements left over, my turn still ends because anytime you explore a new room, that's it. Now some tiles have text that you may read and activate, or maybe even do some die checks, and some might have some other special things that happen. Like in this case here, I would then pull from these story cards, and you'll see that this has this symbol, same as the tile I just drew. This is a misadventure. On the other side of this card, it could have been just this symbol, a compass. It would have been just an adventure. These are a little bit more forgiving. These are a little bit less forgiving. And there'll be a story that will be read to everybody and immerse yourself into the story. And in this case, we will do a die check for strength because it has the strength symbol there. So I'd look at my adventurer, and for the strength icon, I have 3, so I would get 3 dice to roll for the check. Now you would roll these 3 dice. Now these are 12-sided dice that have numbers 1 through 6 on them. They have a 5 with a little hat symbol, a 6 with a gun there, and we have a 3-starred comet, which is the 1. Now here, when rolling dice checks, a 5 and 6 are both successes. A 6 is a critical success, more on that later. And a 1 is always a critical fail when in combat. We'll get to that later as well. Now in this case, I only needed to roll 1 success, either a 5 or a 6. And if I did so, I would successfully read this part of the story and you'd get some type of award, maybe. In this case, I would add 2 courage. We'll get to courage later in the combat section. If I didn't do it, I would have lost 3 courage and I would have lost 2 health for my adventurer. Now, anytime you roll a dice check, before or after, you can use Audacity points to change what happens. And I could spend 1 Audacity point to do some special things with the dice. Now, if I do that before I roll the dice, all 4 5s or 6s are successes. It adds a 4 as a success. Where if I adjust that after I roll, I can re-roll all of the dice here and try to get a better result. Now that would have normally finished my turn because my action of movement stopped when I explored this tile. But let's say when I was moving through here, instead of it being empty, there was actually a creature here. Now to move through this creature, you actually need to evade them. Now there's a foot here that says 2. That means I need to roll dice, and you always check dexterity when you're trying to evade. In this case I have 4, so I would take 4 dice and roll them for the check. And in this case, I'd rolled those 4 dice, and I got a 5 and a 6. That's 2 successes. I could move through as normal. Now, if I did not get 2 successes, I could either just stop my movement there, or I could take damage equal to this combat with the fangs here. He has 5, half rounded down. So I could still move through him, but I would take 2 damage, or in this case, I could just stop if I did not succeed the evade. Now, if you start your turn in a room with a creature, for your action, you can decide to combat this creature. And the first thing that happens, since we're in the adventure phase, there's a medal here that's courage, and he has a courage of 3. So because we're afraid of this guy, we first lose 3 courage. So let's say my courage was currently at -1. You'll see that this goes from -1 to -10. This is 0, and it goes from +1 to +10. So as the courage would, if it would get better, I would get like +1 to all die checks, and even better, I'd get +2 during combat. And if I get all the way to +10, I get a one-time permanent use of +2 in dexterity. Even if I drop below this, I still have this permanent use of this +2 dexterity. Now these are all cumulative, so if I've made it up to here, I have all of these things. In this case, we go down 1, 2, 3, because it was a 3 loss of courage from this creature, and I would lose -1 in my dice checks from now on as long as I'm in this range, and this is cumulative as well. So I moved here, I'd still lose all -1 in all die checks, but I'd also lose 2 in combat. Now if I get here, I must flee the tomb. Now at any point when you have to flee, essentially you have to lose all of your companion cards. You drop them down and you put a little item token here to show that's where they are. Every action that you have has to be a movement action, and it's +1 of your normal movement, and you have to move towards the tomb's entrance. If you run through other creatures, you can't evade them. You essentially take damage equal to half of this creature's combat damage, rounded down. And once you get to the tomb's entrance, essentially you fled the tomb and you are gone. Now, it's as if you died because you get a new adventurer. So what happens when you die in this game? Now, if you do die at any point in this game, essentially you put your guy laying down where he is. You do the same thing. You get rid of your companion cards, put an item token there, and then you would essentially pick a new adventurer to start in the tomb's entrance, and you would start it just like as if you were starting the game with a new character through your character setup. And if you die or flee the tomb, you also move the Comet Track up 1, which could possibly ignite different things for the different scenarios. Now back to this combat. First we checked the courage, and we talked about that. Then we select maybe a weapon or armor and such. Let's check the Tommy gun. This is a dexterity two-handed weapon. You can either use a two-handed weapon or 2 one-handed weapons. In this case, it's a single two-handed weapon. It checks for dexterity. We also get +4 for this combat, and we succeed on a 4, 5, or 6. So because it's a dexterity and I have 4, I get a 4 plus the 4 here, so I get 8 dice to roll. Plus, I could get an Outnumber bonus. If there was an adventurer in there, for each adventurer, up to 4 of them, I could get an extra die for each adventurer's there, or I could also use any of these companion cards also count towards that Outnumber bonus, but a maximum of 4. But in this case, I didn't have any. Now after we've rolled the 8 dice, we check first to see if we take damage. And to do that, we get our base defense. Now to get our base defense, what we do is we add all of our successes, which in this case is this 5, 6, and 6. Now remember, 4s could be a success if you updated your Audacity before you rolled the dice, but in this case it's just 3 here. So with the 5, the 6, the 6. Now we subtract the combat rating, which is 5, where those fangs are by that, and it's 2. So we take 2 damage. And here, of course, we do that on our health meter. We would go down 2 damage just like that. Now the next thing, since we took damage, we see if there's any critical failures. There was 1 critical failure, which is this 1, that 3-starred Comet, and if so, a special ability triggers from this creature. In this case, his special ability listed here is targeted. We get the targeted card to see what it is, and we apply that effect. In this case, it just makes it so that if a monster is equal distance between me and somebody else, he always picks me to go towards, or me to fight, for example. And so that's that. Next, we see how much damage we do to them. So first, we look at how many successes do we have. Normal successes, not critical. A 5 here is 1 regular success. We look at the armor. This guy has 1 armor for the shield, and so we have actually reduced his shield down to 0. Now that we've done that, we count all of our critical successes because he has no armor left, and we have 2. So essentially, our regular successes got through his armor down to 0, and our 2 critical successes dealt 2 blows to him, so he's at -2. Now he has a health here of 7, so he only has 5 left. This would end my turn. It would go to the next player's turn, and then next time I can come in and use my action to fight him again, or maybe another adventurer comes in to fight him as he's wounded. Now, if the damage we dealt actually did kill this creature, the person who dealt the damage would get these soul shards equal to this. So he would get 4 of these for dealing the deadly blow to that person. Any other adventurer in the room would also just get 1. Also, anybody in the room when that creature died gets to move their courage up equal to the courage amount that creature has halved and rounded up. He had a creature courage of 3, half of that rounded up is 2, so I moved it up to everybody in the room when he died would do that. Now the weapon I just used was the Tommy gun, and it has area combat. And for example, if there were multiple creatures in my room, I could fight all of them with just my single action point. Well, that's good, but the bad side is I lose courage for every creature that I'm trying to fight that round, and I still have to roll all the dice separately. So it's like having multiple combats in a row, but all at the same time with one action point with this area combat. When more than one adventurer is in a room, either one of those adventurers can spend an action to trade and trade any cards amongst themselves with each other. You cannot trade the soul shards though. Another different action you can take is searching. If you're in a room where there's no creatures, essentially you can roll a die to search. Now you would roll one die and you'd look at your search marker. Right now green is up, so we'd look at 6 green. And whether you're green, yellow, or red, 6, in this case, I'd get 2 treasures, look at them, and take one of them. And as you can see, as it's red, there's more things that are bad. These are those story points where bad things, you have to do die checks and maybe bad things can happen. Sometimes monsters can spawn and things like that. And after searching, we then move this clockwise 1 triangle. So now if I were to search, I'd be in yellow. Another thing you can do on your turn as an action is use a special ability where some of them, like this, says that you must use an action token to use your special ability. And after I use that Tommy gun, it just goes like that to show that I've used it this turn. Another possible action is sometimes you'll have to spend one of these actions to use one of the artifact soul mongers or item cards themselves. Now if you're in a room without a creature, you can use your action to rest or heal. If you have less than your starting health, you can move your health up 2. Or if you're less than 0, you can get 2 courage up to 0. Or you can heal 1 health and 1 courage up to using those rules. Now the last action you could possibly do is barter with the Soul Monger. You go to the room that has that icon and you can sell back those soul shards that you got for different things. Now here on the left in the manual, there's a big menu of items you can buy or sell with the Soul Monger. For example, you could sell any item for 5 soul shards or an artifact for 15 soul shards, or you can buy certain things for soul shards. And there's sort of a menu there. And during that action phase, again, everyone's taking 1 action at a time. Once everybody has taken all of their actions, we move to the tomb phase. At the beginning of the tomb phase, the expedition leader takes one of the tomb cards and goes through this scenario. So first is the tomb effect. The comet nears and releases cosmic radiation. All players must do a dice check for strength, as I showed you dice. If they fail, they lose 2 health. Second is we move creatures. Now all the creatures will move up to their movement. There's 2, and they will move towards the closest person that is there. Now, if they're equally far from 2 adventurers, the one who has more soul shards they go after. Once all the creatures have moved, we then have creature combat. Now, this creature would initiate combat with one of the adventurers, and if there's 2, it would be the one with the most shards. If they're tied, you just pick. And in this case, it's a normal combat, with the differences is that the outnumbers, if you're outnumbering them by having more adventures, you do not add more dice now. So that's the only difference there in the combat phase of the tomb phase. Now in the spawn creatures, different levels will get different numbers of creatures. In this case, level 1 in the tomb is going to get 1 normal creature and 1 elite creature, where level 3 is going to get 1 elite creature. Now creatures only get added unless otherwise specified into rooms that have these red rings around them. So we have an elite creature here, and we have a normal creature here. Normally they'd be standing up, but I want to show you what they look like better on the camera. Now there can only be 10 creatures entirely in the tomb. If there was 10 and you had to add more, you would not add any more, you would just increase the combat by 1, and depending on the scenario, something else may happen. Then we go to Upkeep. And if you remember, I had my Tommy gun that I used. I now turn it back over. Upkeep, roll a die on a 1 or 2 discard. So good, I've got it. Otherwise, it would have been gone. Everybody does that for all their upkeep weapons. And the Comet Track is also checked at that point to see if anything else happens depending on the scenario. Next is search. Everybody moves their search clockwise by the number there. In this case, it's 1. So I was at yellow, and now I'm at red. And lastly, we would update the Comet Track by 1. And this would go up 1, and again, different things will be triggered at different times in each scenario because of those. Now I want to show you some of the other types of things that can happen when you're exploring tiles in more detail. And so we've already talked about the misadventure queue here, but sometimes you'll have some exploration by the magnifying glass, and it tells you what to do when you enter or explore this tile here. And you have discard all of your items, and then you would draw that many items. Here is a trap. So 3 traps would get put here, and then one of them would get removed because the person who just moved in there also got trapped. You would do a die check for your strength, and if you fail, you would get something bad like a slowed status effect, which reduces your movement and your dexterity, and you could remove it by taking the rest action and rolling a 5 or 6. So different things that traps can do. When a next person comes in here and they get trapped, and the third person, then this stays here, but the traps no longer exist. And then there's certain scenario triggered effects that come in different waves of 1, 2, and 3, and these will do custom things with each scenario. So let's talk a little bit about the depth of these scenarios. So for example, each scenario is a completely different story with lots of thematic things that are going on and different things contextually and activating and things like that. So in this first one that we were showing you earlier, depending on which effect was triggered, the 1, the 2, or 3, certain things will happen. Like for example, if this one triggers, you unleash the curse of the mummy and it tells you to go to 1.1. And so in 1.1, you'd have a story that tells you what's going on, you'd read it out to everybody, and then it tells you what you have to do. So essentially you're doing a dice check for mythos there, and it tells you what happens if you pass or you fail. And there's tons of these different things, pages worth, sometimes in each scenario, of different things that will happen when these different scenario triggered effects happen. And some of the more deep scenarios actually have strategy guides that kind of help you walk you through what types of things, in what order, and what things you should be trying to accomplish. Some scenarios have a much more elaborate tomb setup at the beginning of the game where you're going to use a much more custom setup. And others might actually have some special rules that apply to only that scenario. So many scenarios, a lot of them deep in thematic and technical flair, and they also do all different things for setup, strategies, and scenario triggered effects. So each one is almost like a mini game in itself. For example, in that first scenario I showed you about, the awakening happens when it's 6. And then certain things, you have to defeat them by certain times, and it lays out the winning and losing scenarios here. And that's going to be different for every scenario. Now, it might seem like there's a lot going on here and a lot of icons and such, but the game does come with a player reference here that can be passed around. It's actually the last 2 pages of the rulebook, but it has all these things. It's double-sided, tells you a lot about the game, and that's how you play Secrets of the Lost Tomb. Well, there you have Secrets of the Lost Tomb. I hope those rules, you can refer back to them and dive right in and get right into enjoying this immersive, thematic, story-driven, scenario-based cooperative game, and hopefully you're going on an adventure of a lifetime.